The thunder of hooves echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Tabitha Gallagher raced to escape the three men pursuing her, their accusations trailing behind like a poisonous cloud. It was 1875, and the Colorado Territory had little mercy for women accused of theft, especially when the accuser was Jasper Holloway, the richest cattle baron in the county. "Stop right there, thief!" bellowed the largest of the men, his voice cutting through the morning air. Tabitha's heart hammered in her chest as she ran, clutching her satchel tightly, the parcel. Inside a small leather-bound journal containing proof of Holloway's land swindles weighed heavily against her side. She'd taken nothing that wasn't rightfully hers, but Holloway's influence extended far beyond reason or justice. Her lungs burned as she rounded the corner toward the general store, praying to find someone, anyone who might help. But the early morning hour had left the street nearly deserted. As she reached the center of town, a rough hand caught her shoulder, spinning her around with such force that she lost her footing. "Got you now, you little snake," growled Holloway's foreman, a man known only as Briggs. His weathered face twisted into a cruel smile as his companions caught up. With one brutal shove, they pushed her to the ground, the impact sending dust billowing around her skirts. "The boss wants what you stole, girl," said Briggs, looming over her, "and he ain't particular about how I get it back." Tabitha raised her chin defiantly despite the fear coursing through her. "I stole nothing. This journal belonged to my father," Briggs snorted. "Your pa's been dead 6 months. Anything he had belongs to Mr. Holloway. Now it's called payment for debts. My father owed that man nothing." Tabitha cried, trying to scramble backward, but another of Holloway's men blocked her retreat. "Hold her down," ordered Briggs, reaching for the satchel. "We'll take what's ours and teach this girl what happens to thieves in Silver Creek." Just as they moved toward her, a shadow fell across them, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of a revolver being cocked. "She stands with me." The words were spoken softly, but carried the weight of iron. All heads turned toward the tall figure, silhouetted against the rising sun. He stood with a casual confidence, the gun in his hand held low but steady, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "This ain't your business, stranger," Briggs warned, though his hand hovered uncertainly over his own weapon. "I'm making it my business." The stranger stepped forward, and Tabitha could see him clearly now, a lean, broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, the star on his vest catching the morning light. Name's Ranger Ellis. Roy Ranger Ellis, and I don't take kindly to seeing 3 grown men roughing up a lady in the street. Briggs spat in the dirt. "Lady, she's a thief. That's so." Roy's gaze flicked briefly to Tabitha, then back to Briggs. "Then I suggest you take it up with the sheriff. Law is still the law around here, even for Holloway's men." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant crow of a rooster. Finally, Briggs lowered his hand from his gun belt. "This ain't over," he growled. "Holloway won't forget this." With a jerk of his head, he signaled to his men, and they backed away, disappearing down the street toward the saloon. Only when they were out of sight did Roy holster his weapon and extend a hand to Tabitha. "You all right, miss?" Tabitha hesitated, then placed her hand in his, feeling the callous strength as he helped her to her feet. "Yes, thank you," she said, brushing dust from her skirts, "though I fear you've made powerful enemies on my account." Roy's mouth curved into a slight smile. Wouldn't be the first time. He nodded toward her satchel. "Mind telling me what's worth 3 men hunting you down at daybreak?" Tabitha clutched the bag closer. "Truth, Mr. Ellis, just truth." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Truth's a dangerous commodity in these parts." He glanced up the street where the first signs of the town awakening were evident. You have somewhere safe to go, the boarding house, Tabitha replied, though uncertainty crept into her voice, though I doubt it will remain safe for long. Roy's expression darkened. Holloway's reach is long. He seemed to consider something, then added, I'm heading to the sheriff's office. Might be best if you came along. Told your side of things before Holloway spins his tale. Tabitha nodded gratefully. As they walked side by side down the dusty street, she couldn't help but notice the occasional glances he cast her way. A curious mixture of concern and something she couldn't quite name flickering in his eyes. Sheriff Morgan's office was a simple affair. A wooden building with barred windows and a bench outside where the occasional drunk slept off his indiscretions. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, tobacco, and gun oil. The sheriff himself, a man with more silver in his beard than black, looked up from his desk as they entered. Ellis, he greeted, his gaze shifting to Tabitha. Miss Gallagher, there was caution in his eyes, heard there was trouble. News travels fast, Roy commented, removing his hat. Small town, Sheriff Morgan replied. He gestured to the chairs opposite his desk. Sit, both of you. Once seated, Tabitha recounted everything her father's meticulous record-keeping. The discovery of Holloway's fraudulent land, claims after her father's death, and her belief that the journal contained evidence that could stop Holloway's takeover of half the county. The sheriff listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing. When she finished, he sighed heavily. That's quite a claim, Miss Gallagher, and I don't doubt you believe every word. But Jasper Holloway is a powerful man with friends in the territorial government, so we do nothing. Roy asked, his voice carrying an edge. Sheriff Morgan fixed him with a stern look. I didn't say that, but we need more than a dead man's journal to stand against someone like Holloway. He turned back to Tabitha. May I see this evidence? With reluctance, Tabitha removed the journal from her satchel and placed it on the desk. The sheriff flipped through it, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to concern. Your father was thorough, he admitted finally, but this alone won't be enough. He closed the journal and returned it to Tabitha. Holloway's already filed a complaint, says you stole financial documents from his office, his word against yours, unless we can find someone to corroborate these records. My father's lawyer in Denver has copies. Tabitha said he sent me a wire yesterday saying he's found a judge willing to review the case. The sheriff nodded slowly. That changes things, but Denver's 4 days' ride, and Holloway's men won't let you leave town easily. Roy, who had been silent, leaned forward. I'm headed north anyway. I could escort Miss Gallagher to Denver. Sheriff Morgan's eyebrows rose. Thought you were passing through on your way south. Plans change, Roy replied simply. The sheriff studied him for a long moment before nodding. Might be best. Holloway's less likely to make trouble with the ranger involved. He turned to Tabitha. You should leave today before Holloway realizes what you're planning. As they left the sheriff's office, Roy walked Tabitha back to the boarding house, keeping a watchful eye on the street. Pack only what you need, he advised. Well, leave from the livery at noon. Why are you helping me? Tabitha asked suddenly, stopping to face him. You don't know me. Roy's expression softened slightly. Let's just say I've seen what happens when men like Holloway get to write their own rules. He tipped his hat. Noon, Miss Gallagher. True to his word, Roy was waiting at the livery when Tabitha arrived, her possessions packed into a single bag. He'd acquired a second horse, a steady-looking mare with intelligent eyes. She's gentle but sure-footed, Roy explained, helping Tome out-mount. We'll stick to the main trail until we're clear of the county, then cut north through the foothills. Less likely to run into trouble that way. They left Silver Creek under the watchful eyes of curious townsfolk. Tabitha could feel the weight of their stares, could almost hear the whispers that would follow their departure. She wondered how many of them had suffered under Holloway's schemes, how many had lost land or livelihood to his greed. As the town receded behind them, Tabitha felt both relief and apprehension. The open country stretched before them, beautiful and unforgiving. She glanced at her companion, noting the easy way he sat his horse, the alertness in his posture, despite his relaxed appearance. "Have you been a ranger long, Mr. Ellis?" she asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "Roy," he corrected, "and yes, going on 5 years now. What made you choose such a life?" He was quiet for so long that Tabitha thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested deeper waters than his calm exterior implied. "After the war, I came west looking for something, not sure what. Ended up drifting, taking work where I could find it." His gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead. Saw too many people suffering because those with power did as they pleased. Figured wearing this star might help even the odd sum. Tabitha considered his words. "My father used to say that justice was like water. It always finds its level eventually, no matter how many dams men build to hold it back." Roy glanced at her, a genuine smile briefly transforming his face. "Sounds like a wise man he was," Tabitha said softly. "He taught at the university in Boston before coming west. Said he wanted to live someplace where a man was measured by more than his family name or the size of his bank account." "And you, what brings Boston learning to Silver Creek?" Tabitha smiled wistfully. "I was born in Boston, but I grew up out here. After Mother died, Father couldn't bear the city anymore. We came west when I was 10. I've spent more years under these skies than eastern ones." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, punctuated by comfortable silences as they rode. By late afternoon, they'd covered good ground, and Roy suggested they make camp near a small stream sheltered by cottonwoods. As Tabitha gathered firewood, she watched Roy care for their horses with practiced efficiency. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, the quiet confidence with which he approached each task. When their simple camp was established, they shared a meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. "We should reach Denver in 3 days if the weather holds," Roy said, adding another log to the fire. "Maybe less if we push the horses." Tabitha nodded, gazing into the flames. "I've never been to Denver." Father always spoke of it as a place of possibility where the rough edges of the frontier meet civilization's polish. "It's growing fast," Roy acknowledged. "Not quite the city your father might remember, but not a mining camp either. Plenty of good people there, and plenty looking to make their fortune any way they can." They talked into the evening, sharing stories of their lives before Silver Creek. Roy spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the Union Army, and his wanderings after the war. Tabitha told him of Boston's cobblestone streets, and her father's passionate lectures on history and justice. As night deepened, Roy insisted Tabitha take the bedroll while he kept watch. "Get some sleep," he urged. "I'll wake you if there's trouble." Despite her exhaustion, Tabitha found sleep elusive. The events of the day replayed in her mind, particularly the moment Roy had appeared, steady and fearless against Holloway's men. She watched him through half-closed eyes as he sat against a tree, his profile outlined by the dying fire. There was something in his stillness that spoke of both strength and sadness. And Tabitha found herself wondering what experiences had carved those lines around his eyes, what memories kept him vigilant in the darkness. Dawn broke clear and cool, painting the landscape in gold and rose. They broke camp quickly, eager to put more distance between themselves and Silver Creek. The day passed in steady travel, with Roy occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. By midday, they'd reached the foothills where the terrain grew more challenging, but offered better cover. "Tracks," Roy said suddenly, reining in his horse and dismounting. He studied the ground with a frown. "3 riders moving fast passed through here yesterday heading north." Tabitha's pulse quickened. "Holloway's men can't be sure, but we should be careful." Roy remounted, his expression grave. "We'll take the high pass instead of following the valley. It's rougher going, but less likely they'd expect it." The change in route meant slower progress, but Tabitha didn't complain. As they picked their way through rocky terrain, she found herself studying Roy with growing curiosity. His caution never bordered on fear, his vigilance never wavered, yet there was a gentleness in how he treated both horses and her that belied his hard exterior. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow near a spring. After a simple meal, Roy cleaned his revolver by firelight, his hands moving with practiced precision. "Did you ever have to use it?" Tabitha asked, nodding toward the weapon. "In your work as a ranger," Roy's hand stilled momentarily. "Yes," he said simply. Then after a pause, "Not something I take pride in, but sometimes there's no other way. I didn't mean to pry." Tabitha said, regretting the question. Roy shook his head. "It's a fair question." He resumed his work, his voice quiet but steady. "First time was hardest. Young outlaw, barely 20, robbing stage. Coaches near El Paso could have surrendered but chose to draw instead." His expression darkened. "Sometimes I still see his face in my dreams." Tabitha reached out impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, then surprise flickering across his features at the contact. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended the brief time they'd known each other. Then Roy cleared his throat and gently moved away, returning the revolver to its holster. "We should turn in," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Long day tomorrow." Morning brought mist and a light drizzle that soon cleared, leaving the air fresh and the trail muddy. They traveled in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. By midday, the sun had burned away the clouds, and they stopped to rest the horses near a stand of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering like gold coins in the breeze. As Tabitha stretched her legs, grateful for the respite from riding, a distant sound caught her attention, the unmistakable rhythm of approaching hoof beat-ats. Roy was instantly alert, his hand moving to his weapon. "Get your horse," he said quietly, "into the trees quickly." They had barely concealed themselves in the aspen grove when 3 riders appeared on the trail below. Even from a distance, Tabitha recognized Briggs, his broad shoulders unmistakable. With him were the same 2 men who had cornered her in Silver Creek. "They must have guessed our destination," Roy murmured, watching as the men examined the muddy ground, clearly looking for tracks. "Stay quiet." Tabitha's heart pounded as one of the men pointed in their direction. Had they left obvious signs? She held her breath as the men conferred, then to her horror, turned their horses toward the grove. "They've spotted us," Roy said grimly. "Stay behind me." As Holloway's men approached, Roy stepped from the trees, his stance casual, but his hand resting near his revolver. "Gentlemen," he called. Long way from Silver Creek, Briggs reined in his horse, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "Well, now if it ain't the hero, Ranger. Figured you might head for Denver." His gaze shifted to Tabitha, who had emerged to stand slightly behind Roy. "Hand over the girl in that journal, Ellis, and we can all ride away from this." "Can't do that," Roy replied evenly. "Miss Gallagher is under my protection, and we're bound for Denver to see a judge. You're welcome to make your case there legal-like." Briggs laughed, a harsh sound that echoed among the trees. "Holloway, don't wait on judges. You're outnumbered, Ranger. Be smart." "I faced worse odds," Roy said, his voice dangerously soft. "Ride away, Briggs. Whatever Holloway is paying you, it's not worth dying for." For a tense moment, the air between them seemed to crackle with potential violence. Tabitha held her breath, keenly aware that these men would not hesitate to kill for their employer's interests. Then Briggs made a subtle gesture, and his companion's hands moved toward their guns, but Roy was faster, his revolver clearing its holster in a blur of motion. A shot cracked through the still air, and one of Briggs's men cried out, clutching his arm as his weapon tumbled to the ground. "The next one won't be so merciful," Roy warned, his aim unwavering. "Drop your guns, both of you." Briggs hesitated, calculation evident in his narrowed eyes. For a heartbeat, Tabitha thought he might risk it anyway, but then he slowly raised his hands. "This ain't over," he growled as his remaining companion likewise surrendered. "Ho has friends all over the territory. You won't make it to Denver." "Yet here we are," Roy replied coolly. "Toss those gun belts over here nice and easy." Once disarmed, Briggs and his men had no choice but to retreat, taking their wounded companion with them. Roy watched until they disappeared from view, then turned to Tabitha. "We need to move," he said urgently. "They'll be back with more men." They rode hard for the remainder of the day, pushing through exhaustion to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Holloway's men. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the foothills, following game trails and shallow stream beds to obscure their path. By nightfall, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. In the far distance, the lights of a settlement twinkled like earthbound stars. "Mining town," Roy explained as they made camp. "We'll skirt around it tomorrow, too risky to pass through. Word travels fast in places like that, and Holloway might have contacts there." Tabitha nodded, too tired to speak. The day's events had left her drained both physically and emotionally. As she helped prepare their simple meal, she found her hands trembling slightly. "You handled yourself well back there," Roy said quietly, noticing her distress. Most people would have panicked. Tabitha managed a small smile. "I'm scared, not helpless. There's a difference." Roy's expression softened. "That there is." He handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing momentarily. "We'll reach Denver day after tomorrow. Once we're there, you'll be safe." "And you?" Tabitha asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to her. "What will you do once we reach Denver?" Roy stared into the darkness beyond their campfire. "Continue north, I suppose. There's always work for a ranger." The thought of parting ways left an unexpected, hollow feeling in Tabitha's chest. In just a few days, this man had become more than a protector. He was someone she trusted, someone whose presence she had come to value beyond mere safety. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As Tabitha settled into her bedroll, she found herself watching Roy as he took the first watch, his silhouette steady against the night sky. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of pursuit and narrow escapes, but always with Roy by her side, solid and unwavering. Morning dawned crisp and clear, the first hint of autumn coloring the landscape. They set out early, skirting wide around the mining town as Roy had suggested. By midday, they had descended into gentler terrain, following a well-worn trail that Roy assured her would lead them to the main road to Denver. As they rode, Tabitha found herself studying Roy's profile, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he spotted something of interest. She had known him for merely 3 days, yet she felt as though she had glimpsed something rare and valuable in him, a steadfast honor that went beyond his ranger's badge, a quiet strength that asked nothing in return. "Something on your mind?" Roy asked, catching her gaze. Tabitha flushed slightly. "I was just thinking about Denver and what comes after." It wasn't entirely a lie. If the judge rules in my favor, many in Silver Creek might finally get justice. Roy nodded. Your father would be proud. I hope so, Tabitha said softly. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. Holloway has powerful friends, as he keeps reminding us. Standing up for what's right is never wrong, Roy replied. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic sound of a counterpoint to Tabitha's thoughts. Finally, she spoke again. And what about you, Roy? What do you stand for beyond your duty as a ranger? He seemed surprised by the question, taking his time to answer. Simple things, I suppose. Truth, fairness, the idea that a person's worth isn't measured by their wealth or influence. He glanced at her. Things your father believed in too, from what you've told me. Yes, Tabitha agreed, warmth spreading through her at the connection, though he would have added beauty and knowledge to that list. Roy smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. Sounds like we might have gotten along. As the day progressed, they encountered more travelers on the road, merchants with wagons, families in covered carts, lone riders hurrying on unknown errands. Each passing stranger increased Tabitha's anxiety, knowing any might carry word of their presence back to Holloway's men. Roy sensed her unease. We're almost there. He reassured her. By this time tomorrow, you'll be meeting with your father's lawyer, and all this will be behind you. Tabitha nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. Yet the thought of tomorrow brought not just relief, but a pang of sadness. Once in Denver, their paths would diverge. Roy would continue his ranger duties, and she would return to Silver Creek to rebuild what Holloway had tried to destroy. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, close enough to Denver to see the glow of the city on the horizon, but far enough to avoid unwanted attention. As they sat by the fire, Tabitha found herself reluctant to sleep, knowing it was their last night on the trail together. Roy, she began hesitantly, I want to thank you, not just for protecting me, but for believing me, for standing with me when no one else would. He looked up from the fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, Tabitha shook her head firmly. Not anyone. You could have walked away in Silver Creek, left me to Holloway's men. You didn't even know me. Roy was silent for a long moment. There was something about you, he finally said, his voice low. Something that reminded me why I became a ranger in the first place. The way you stood up to those men, even outnumbered. That kind of courage deserves to be honored. Tabitha felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Will I see you again after Denver? I mean, the question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Roy's eyes met hers, and for an instant, Tabitha saw something there that made her heart beat faster, a longing that mirrored her own. I'd like that, he said simply. They reached Denver by midday, the bustling streets a stark contrast to the quiet of the trail. Tabitha felt oddly disoriented by the noise and activity, having grown accustomed to Roy's companionable silence and the rhythm of their journey. The lawyer's office was located in a respectable building near the courthouse, its polished brass nameplate announcing Harrison and Sons, attorneys at law. Inside, they were greeted by a clerk who ushered them into a well-appointed room where a gay-haired man sat behind an imposing desk. Miss Gallagher, he rose to greet her, extending his hand. I'm Clarence Harrison. Your father spoke highly of you in his letters. His gaze shifted to Roy. And you are Roy Ellis. Roy replied, removing his hat. I escorted Miss Gallagher from Silver Creek. Harrison nodded, gesturing for them to sit. A dangerous journey, I imagine. Jasper Holloway is not a man who takes challenges lightly. We encountered some resistance, Tabitha acknowledged, retrieving the journal from her satchel and placing it on the desk. But we made it. Here's my father's evidence. Harrison examined the journal carefully, his expression growing increasingly grim as he turned the pages. This confirms what your father suggested in his correspondence. Holloway has been systematically falsifying land claims, using intimidation and bribery to expand his holdings. He looked up at Tabitha. With this and the copies your father sent me, we have enough to bring formal charges. Relief washed over Tabitha. So, it's over. Holloway will face justice. It's not quite that simple. Harrison cautioned. The case will need to be presented to a territorial judge, and Holloway will certainly fight back. But yes, Miss Gallagher, I believe justice is within reach. He smiled slightly. Your father would be very proud. As they left the lawyer's office, Tabitha felt lighter than she had in months. The burden of her father's legacy, the fear of failing him, had eased significantly. She turned to Roy, unable to contain her smile. We did it, she said, impulsively, grasping his hand. Roy returned the pressure briefly before releasing her, his own smile more restrained but genuine. You did it, he corrected. I just provided the escort service. They walked in companionable silence toward the hotel where Harrison had arranged rooms for them. As they reached the entrance, Roy hesitated. I should report to the ranger office while we're here, he said. Let them know what's happened with Holloway. Tabitha nodded, trying to hide her disappointment at their imminent separation. Of course, when will you leave for the north? Roy studied her face, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. I've been thinking about that, he said slowly. The northern assignment, it's not set in stone. Rangers are needed all over the territory. Hope blossomed in Tabitha's chest, including Silver Creek. Especially places like Silver Creek, Roy agreed, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Places where good people need someone to stand with them against men like Holloway. Tabitha took a step closer to him, emboldened by the warmth in his gaze. I think Silver Creek would benefit greatly from having a ranger stationed there. Someone who understands justice isn't just about the law on paper, but how it protects ordinary people. Is that so? Roy's voice was soft, his eyes never leaving hers. And would there be other reasons for a ranger to consider such a posting? Perhaps, Tabitha replied, her heart racing. Perhaps there might be someone there who'd be very glad of his company. Someone who's come to admire his courage and his kindness. Someone who doesn't want to say goodbye just yet. Roy reached out slowly, his hand gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Well, then, he murmured, I suppose I should request that assignment. Seems like the kind of place a ranger could do some good. Maybe even find something he didn't know he was looking for. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Denver's streets, Tabitha Gallagher and Roy Ellis stood close together, their journey from adversaries to allies to something deeper written in the space between them. City bustled around them, but in that moment they existed in a world of their own, making a world where courage was rewarded, justice prevailed, and standing together meant never having to stand alone again. 6 months later, the citizens of Silver Creek gathered at the small church on the edge of town. Jasper Holloway was gone, his empire dismantled by the territorial courts, his stolen land returned to their rightful owners. In his place, a new order had taken root, one built on fairness and mutual respect, guided by the steady hand of the town's resident ranger. As Tabitha walked down the aisle toward Roy, her father's journal tucked safely away at home, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. From that first confrontation in the dusty street when he had stood between her and danger with a simple declaration that would change both their lives. She stands with me now as she reached him and took his hands and hers. Those words had taken on new meaning. They would stand together through whatever life brought their way. Partners in all things, bound by a love forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose. Ready, Roy whispered, his eyes reflecting all the love and promise that had grown between them. Tabitha squeezed his hands, her heart full, with you always. As they spoke their vows before the assembled townsfolk, Tabitha knew that the journal that had brought them together was just the beginning of their story. The pages ahead remained to be written, but they would write them together, standing side by side in the home they had claimed and the life they had chosen, a life of purpose, of justice, and of love that had found them when they least expected it, in the wild heart of the West.